Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. We've got a really busy show today, and I hope you'll stick with us for the whole program. We're so glad you're with us. Today is June 14th. And it's not really a holiday, but it's a special day, Flag Day. A lot of people don't really pay attention to that, but it's an important day. And actually, Congress approved it, and then President Harry Truman signed the bill for the national observance of Flag Day. And of course, you're supposed to fly your flag if you have one. And even there's some different festivities going on across the nation. So I would encourage that. Part of Harry Truman's proclamation about Flag Day was this beloved emblem, our flag, which flies above all our people, of whatever creed or race, signatizes, that's a different word, probably not a word of current usage, but it signatizes our respect for human rights and the protection of such rights are afforded, that are afforded under our form of government. So I think of human rights, and then we think of this week, the North Korean flag that flew next to ours at the Singapore summit on Tuesday, which signifies no such thing. Their flag does not signify human rights. They are not important in that nation. And we must make that statement clear, I think, even as successful as this summit and the series of summits may be, as hopeful as we are about them, I think we do need to remember the kind of dictator Kim Jong-un is, and the country that is there, the people that actually need to be liberated as part of this process. And, you know, we're watching, we're hoping, and we're praying. President Trump has boldly gone in and gone from the top down. I know there have been negotiations for several weeks, but he's really taking the bull by the horns to begin the process of getting North Korea's nukes off the table, and perhaps changing really the relationship between these countries and changing things for the entire world to get rid of that menace, that nuclear menace. So, our prayers, he's hopeful. His words are very hopeful, as they always are about things he's trying to do. And I think we ought to join in prayer that he will be successful in this. And we will continue to discuss that a little bit more today and also tomorrow on our weekend edition. By the way, it is also President Trump's birthday today. So happy birthday, Mr. President. What a week you've had. And it's only Thursday. And another sort of anniversary that we're celebrating today is the 1-year anniversary of the horrible incident, more than incident, tragedy that took place on a baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia, just a year ago. And certainly it was the practice of a congressional baseball team. And, the Twitter name handle for Steve Scalise, who's the whip in the House and who was the one injured the worst, is hashtag Steve Scalise is officially back in the batter's box. He's back serving well. He's a wonderful legislator and member of the House of Representatives, and we're so glad he is. But The Heritage Foundation, their Daily Signal publication today, kind of went back and interviewed some of the people that were involved in this. And we've posted it at pointofview.net. You can read it. But I just wanted to kind of go through a little bit some of the things that they're remembering. And one of the representatives from Michigan, Representative Mike Bishop, said he was present there on that Thursday when a man opened fire during practice for this congressional baseball game. And he says he and the others say that the shooting is etched in their memories. They also say that it affects how they see their public service now. It's funny how things like that will affect you and kind of make you rethink your purpose in life because you could have lost it that day. But he said each time as he thinks about his public service, this Representative Bishop says each time they make your heart skip because you knew it was coming your way. He said of the gunshots. So whenever he hears gunshots now, he remembers it. I was still in the field at the time, and I could hear the bullets whizzing over. I saw stuff flying over the back of the dugout, and you could hear it pinging off the chain link fence. It's really horrifying when you think about it. And then Steve Scalise, House Majority Whip, from Louisiana, he's a Republican, and at least 21 other members who were out there at the baseball practice. He was hurt. He returned to Congress. He was badly hurt. He returned to Congress on September 28th, walking with canes. He had had extensive surgeries. He had an initial recovery from the bullet that shattered his left femur and damaged his hip and pelvis. Obviously an athletic guy, but he was really taken down for a while. I'm so glad, and I know we all are grateful. There were a lot of prayers going out for him. But what happened was one bullet hit the team coach and former Capitol Hill staffer Matt Mika in the chest, just missing his heart. Another bullet severed a major nerve in his left arm, so he was badly hurt. His doctor said that he sustained only a minor injury, though, after all that. Not as badly hurt as I just said. So what happened, though, was Capitol Police Special Agent David Bailey and Special Agent Crystal Griner walked toward the situation, and they really kind of saved the situation. And Crystal Griner was hurt badly. So, we had some heroes in this situation. And it was just a miracle that no one died in this. And the fact that Steve Scalise was there meant that the Capitol Police security detail was there with them. And so the day would have ended much more tragically if that had not been the case. On July 27, 2017, President Trump awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor to one of the Capitol Police, who was also wounded, and also to Ms. Griner, who was still walking on crutches at that time. Turns out the guy, and then Representative Jeff Duncan, he had left early. He'd left the practice early, and somebody came up to him to ask if it was Republicans or Democrats who were practicing, and he answered. Turns out that was the shooter, and he went and shot up the field. Jeff Duncan said, turns out the guy had his name on an assassin's list he carried in his pocket. There were 6 of us, and Representative Duncan was one of those. So he said it was a God thing that the way things turned out. And we're so glad they turned out the way they did. Well, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. This segment, we are going to talk about keeping Texas red. The Republican convention is going on in San Antonio, Texas. That's why I'm here in this seat, because Kirby's there. He's a delegate to the convention, and I'm sure when he gets back, he'll have lots to say about it. But later in the segment, we're going to talk with Representative Matt Rinaldi from Irving, Texas, about what's going on at the convention. I think Jonathan Sines from Texas Values will also be with us, and we'll have a lot more today. Stay with us for all of that. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the questions many liberals are asking these days is what happened to Alan Dershowitz. The emeritus Harvard law professor has been critical of the Mueller investigation and talks about the criminalization of politics in his most recent book. But the real question should be reversed. What happened to all the liberals who used to demand that our civil liberties be protected by government? Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of how liberals were riding high after the Watergate scandal. Even before that, they were leading the charge in criticizing the overreach of presidents and their bureaucracies like the FBI and the CIA. They rightly criticized the intelligence agencies for spying on American citizens. Those days are but a distant memory now. Liberal politicians have downplayed or excused Watergate-like abuses of power by the former Barack Obama administration. Liberal journalists apparently have few concerns that the FBI apparently used at least one secret informant to gather information about the 2016 Trump campaign. And they didn't seem too bothered about the national security team unmasking the names of U.S. citizens. Civil libertarians seem indifferent that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign paid a foreign agent, Christopher Steele, to compile dirt on Republican candidate Donald Trump, and that the details of the dossier were leaked. There is, of course, much more than this, but even this very short summary illustrates the remarkable change not in Alan Dershowitz, but in the liberal establishment. They believe that President Trump is a danger and therefore turn a blind eye to abuses they used to criticize just a few years ago. That's why they should really be asking, what happened to us? I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're so glad you're with us today for Point of View. I want to mention that our call-in number is 800-351-1212. And even beginning now, I welcome your phone calls on any of the things we talked about. We've already mentioned that today is Flag Day, and also that it's just interesting that our flag means so much about freedom and liberty, and yet it was flown next to the North Korean flag this week at the famous summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And we need to just remind ourselves that their flag does not mean that, and that this leader is a brutal dictator. And yet this president is a disruptor, and our president is dealing with this situation in a way that others haven't. And I think my opinion is we need to be hopeful and prayerful that this works out, even though some of it is counterintuitive to many of us who have watched it. And we will talk about that situation. But I want to open up the phones in case you have any comments on that. I'd love to hear what you think about the summit. I also mentioned that we have posted a story from the Daily Signal about the shooting on the Alexandria baseball field during a congressional baseball practice last year, just a year ago today. It was just tragic, and some were hurt, but it turned out that no one was killed. And I think that many tragedies, many injuries, and perhaps lives lost were averted because of the bravery of Capitol Police and the security detail there. And so that's another story. You can actually read about that. It's sort of inspiring what the Daily Signal put up on their website. We've linked to that at pointofview.net, so you can go there. We have a lot at pointofview.net for you today, as we do every day. And then Matt Rinaldi, who is a member of the state legislature here in Texas, is going to join us in just at the bottom of the hour today. He is at the Texas State Convention in San Antonio, Texas. I mentioned Kirby's also there. And, in his other life, he works in politics and he serves his community. He's a precinct chairman. I think he's a delegate to the convention. He's there. And we're going to talk with Matt about keeping Texas red. I know all the everyone there at the convention wants to do that. And certainly at this point, there's not really a risk of Texas going blue or even purple. But in the future, things might be different because this state is growing and people are coming in, companies are coming in and making demands and getting concessions, monetary concessions. And in some cases, they're getting policy concessions at the local level. So there could be some changes made. And we have to continue to elect people who will help keep the state prosperous and keep us free for practicing our own religion and pro-life and all of the things that we hold so dear. We are very blessed in this state to have people serving us that hold those things in their hearts the way, most of them are Christians. I would say, I'll have to ask Kirby when he gets back. But the bulk of the people that serve as delegates do it because they love our state and they love the Lord, and they want to make sure the biblical values are preserved and the opportunities to practice our own faith. And just when you look at the platform that comes out of the Texas Convention, and usually the National Republican platform too, the positions are all very biblical. That's what the Republican Party stands for right now, and we want to keep it that way. So that's what this convention's about. If you are not involved in it, you may want to be praying for it because it's very important. And I just salute all the people. Many of them come in here during this hour of Point of View. We've had different people during this past several months to come in. I had Matt Krause on a couple of weeks ago. He's also a state representative. I know Jeff Leach has been here. Matt Shaheen, Angela Paxton, who's running for state senator on the Republican. She won the Republican nomination. Candy Noble and others. They've been in talking to us here on Point of View about the issues that are important. And I'm going to ask Matt Rinaldi about those. And then Jonathan Saenz from Texas Values is going to come and join me on the phone. And the reason I wanted to talk to him, he's probably there too, but the reason I want to talk to him is because, of course, we've had the Masterpiece Supreme Court decision, and it was a positive decision for Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shops, and it certainly protected protected him from being sanctioned by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. But in a sense, we can discuss this further too, there have to be more decisions to really protect our religious liberties and the right of wedding vendors and other businesses to operate their businesses according to their principles, and especially in this LGBT area, in this same-sex marriage area. There have to be more decisions about that, and there have to be other things done too. And Jonathan Saenz came out with an article this week. We've also posted it at pointofview.net that really explains what we need to do here in Texas. There's actually legislation we need to pass here to protect religious liberty, and it will help a lot to sort of capitalize on the Masterpiece decision. Well, I did mention this summit going on, or that just took place for one day, and it was the beginning of many talks. But, we know, as I said, that Kim Jong-un imprisons, tortures, and murders his own people. He got a propaganda victory on Tuesday, and Trump is trying a different way. He threatened at first to answer all of Kim's saber rattling with attacks of war, but now here they are talking. And, could this time be different from other presidents? Many people are skeptical. Certainly the Democrats are. And I think, to be honest, that Republicans would probably be very skeptical of Democrats for trying this. Donald Trump is just such a different animal that I can never doubt him. I think that he is disruptive. Did he disrupt the status quo by doing this? That's what Paul Ryan said he did. And so now there really has to be a shift to concentrate all efforts of the whole party and the country, says Paul Ryan. Oh, this is not Paul Ryan. This is Kim. He says now to concentrate all efforts of the whole party, that's the Communist Party in North Korea and country, to the socialist and economic construction. So those statements are to signal that their priorities are economic now and not nuclear. Have they reached their nuclear goals? Well, not quite, but they've reached many of them. So, are we going to be effective in this denuclearization goal that we want to reach? And even how do we define denuclearization? Is denuclearization getting rid of all nuclear weapons? I think that's what our government would like to see, but I'm not sure that's what it means to the North Koreans. We will see. So there's a lot. And, Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was well aware when he was the head of the CIA of what they had, or at least as aware as anyone, of what they had and what they were developing. And, of course, he was even over there even before he was confirmed as Secretary of State. So our administration right now is working for something different. And they came out with a document. They called it comprehensive on Tuesday, but it really had very few statements in it that signified action. It was an agreement to move toward ending the nuclear weapons program of North Korea. And then the U.S. said that we would halt joint military exercises with South Korea. And, of course, that is key because those really maintain our readiness in case there's an attack. And so Trump found it, and it was surprising to many, even in government, that he would promise this. But he did. And it must have been strategic on his part. I don't think he just threw it out. But it may have made a statement to Kim that we were serious. So that's where we are. And now there will be more talks. There will be more negotiation beginning and more plans. In a press conference right after the speech, Trump was asked, how can we be sure Kim is not cheating? And the president said he believes Kim might want to do this as much or even more than me because they see a very bright future for North Korea. That's what he tried to portray for them. He even showed them how they might have hotels on the beaches in North Korea and turn it into a tourist mecca. Trump was also asked at that press conference what he would say to the 100,000 North Koreans kept imprisoned in gulags in the country. And he said he thought that this process would actually be good for them because things are going to change. Again, I think it's worth our prayers. And I think we ought to continue to pray throughout this. And, criticism where criticism is warranted of the administration, certainly we should not stop watching or doing that. But I think this is a time where we ought to also offer hopeful prayers. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up again, we are going to talk about keeping Texas red with one of our state legislators. And, I forgot to mention the Southern Baptist Convention is here in Dallas, too. I don't know if we're going to say much about that today, but perhaps tomorrow. Stay with us. We've got a lot more here on Point of View.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. While we're waiting for Matt Rinaldi to join us, I think he is at the Republican convention in San Antonio. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about keeping Texas red. But I wanted to mention some of the, well, there were primaries this week, as there are often nowadays in various states across the country. And one of note this week, and I think what everybody's looking at with the primaries in the Republican side is, are the Trump-backed candidates winning? How it just kind of gives people an idea of Donald Trump and, what kind of a coattails he has, or is he actually causing problems for the Republicans, as many thought he would. And there's one race of note in South Carolina, and that is the race for Mark Sanford's congressional seat. He's a Republican. He actually lost. And this is a little bit shocking to some people because Mark Sanford is a very popular politician in South Carolina, but he's had some problems too. He's been a Trump critic on some things. He's very conservative. He always stands on principle on financial and fiscal issues. And so he lost the seat to Katie Arrington, who was actually backed by Trump. A lot of people are saying it was because of Trump. Trump had that influence. And so, we're just wondering if that's the case. I mean, he was governor and he did this really stupid thing. He kind of went MIA for a while. It turns out he was with a mistress in Argentina. But he continued to serve his term as governor. He ended up, after leaving office, he was out of politics for a while. He came back and ran for the seat in his district and won, and he's been a fairly effective congressman, but he will be in Congress no more. So that's what happened in one of the primaries this week. Well, we now have Matt Rinaldi with us, and he's state representative. He has been in the Texas House of Representatives since 2014. He represents House District 115, which is northwest Dallas County, encompassing Irving, Texas. And he's a lawyer, healthcare attorney. He actually graduated from Boston University School of Law. And he's just so conservative and stands on principle. He's a trusted source on constitutional issues, and he speaks out on these matters. And Matt, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Are you in San Antonio, as I have been saying?
We are in Georgetown right now on the way there.
Okay, well, great. So you're on your way, and, I'm thinking that this is going to be sort of a rousing Texas Republican convention in a sense with, just a lot of people excited about keeping Texas red. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about the Democrat enthusiasm, but the enthusiasm I've seen on the Republican side of the aisle, at least in Texas, has been overwhelming. I mean, we've had, I have a competitive general election campaign, as do many people in the Dallas area. And, we've held some fundraisers already, and donors are extremely excited. People are donating more than they ever have before. People are attending events who've never attended before. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm on both sides.
Well, Matt, who is speaking today? Do you know?
I don't know who the speaker is today. I've admittedly not looked at the schedule. I know we're having a Freedom Caucus reception at 5:30 that I would encourage everybody to attend, and I'm going to the James Dickey's reception tonight, hoping to reelect him as party chair. He's doing a great job, and going to the Power Texans Torchbearers reception as well.
Yeah, so there's a race for the chair of the Republican convention. That's one of the big tasks that has to be done. But Matt, I want to talk to you about your race. What are your big issues? I mean, what's the most important thing that you're saying you want to accomplish in your next term?
Well, the most important thing I want to accomplish in my next term is keeping Texas the economic powerhouse that it currently is. And we've done that by keeping taxes low, by keeping regulations low, and by keeping the government out of people's business. And my opponent and the Democratic Party in general wants to make Texas more like California. They want government in business. They want to increase taxes. They want abortion at 40 weeks, my opponent in particular was on the board of directors of the Human Rights Campaign, a far-left, anti-Christian, LGBT activist organization that tries to push causes like transgender sex education in kindergarten. So, we're each of the Republicans who's up for election, whether they be on the right side like me, whether they be more moderate, is up against a Democratic Party that isn't your father's Democratic Party. They're pushing far left issues like no immigration enforcement, like abortion at 40 weeks. So we really need to get out there, and we really need to get enthusiastic about this election.
We have had all this growth in Texas, and companies, we're happy that companies are moving in from other states. So they should move in because we have such a great economic climate. But what's happening then is it's raising the values of people's personal real estate, their home. Property taxes are going up, and I experienced this when I was growing up in California. We had to deal with it with Proposition 13. What do you think the legislature will do about property taxes?
Well, we clearly have to do something, and I hope that we will pass the governor's proposal to limit property tax growth to 2.5% through revenue caps. I think first we have to stop the huge growth in property taxes before we can address the reducing them. In as terms of reducing them, Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a great think tank in Austin, just proposed a plan to eliminate the Robin Hood tax and effectively allow the state to buy down the school property, what's called M&O, maintenance and operation property taxes, which is the bulk of our property taxes, and by using surplus revenue to do it. And this great economic growth has given us surplus revenue in the state. So instead of growing government, our idea is to buy down property taxes and give people more of their money back.
Wow, sounds like a great plan. Listen, Matt, there's going to be new leadership in the House. So some things that you didn't get done because it never came out for a vote, now will. And so talk about that a little bit and how you see the climate there for the next session.
Well, it's funny. Last session, we were incredibly successful despite House leadership. And I think that was part of what led to House leadership changing next session.
They were frustrated.
I think the speaker was frustrated because generally the Speaker of the House has a lot of power to determine what gets passed. Last session, we passed a very conservative agenda, one of the most conservative that we've ever had in Texas history, despite the Speaker's opposition to a lot of what we passed. Actually, Mark Jones from Rice University did a study, and what he found over the years was Democrats were on the winning side of probably about 90 to 95% of the votes over the Speaker's tenure. That got reduced to about 40% last session. So we used to be passing Democrat bills in a Republican House. Last session, we weren't doing that. We were passing Republican bills. And I think with a new speaker, you're going to see that happen easier. You're going to see something like Dan Patrick has done in the Texas Senate, where pro-life bills are sailing through to the governor's desk. Where property tax cuts are sailing through to the governor's desk, school choice, property tax cuts, conservative legislation. The Republican platform, essentially, in a Republican state will pass, which is a novel concept, but it'll happen.
Well, people think that Texas is so conservative, and I think over those years that you mentioned in the past where Democrat legislation was passing and our speaker and the leadership in the House acted like Democrats in many senses, I think people that aren't from here are surprised about that. You think so?
Oh, yeah, I know. Yes, exactly. I moved to Texas almost 20 years ago from the Northeast, and you had said Boston University, and I thought Texas was a hotbed of conservatism, controlled by Republicans. And then I realized, well, the people who were Democrats, who would be Democrats in the Democrat state, just run as Republicans, and they pretend to be conservative during the campaign, and they go to Austin and do something completely different and hope to pull the wool over people's eyes. There's even a whole network of issue-based groups that purport to be conservative groups, but really just exist to give cover for people who don't care about the actual issues that they purport to represent, like Texas Alliance for Life, or on the life issue, and other groups on other issues. It's amazing the methods the establishment uses to adapt to not make progress on conservative issues.
Wow.
Generally, their goal is to stay in office. They don't want to upset the apple cart, and conservative issues are controversial. They don't like controversy. They like everything going nice and smoothly so that they can get reelected with no problem. But sometimes, people didn't elect us to do that. People elected us to fight, and that's what we're doing.
Well, we know, Matt, that you're a fighter. We're so glad you're there. And I do want to drill down on some of those groups in Texas that are not as they seem. I think we need to do that in the run-up to the next session, so we will do that. I hope you'll come back and join us to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, anytime.
Well, listen, thank you for calling in on your way down to San Antonio. Have a great convention.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's Matt Rinaldi, and we'll be right back with more of Point of View.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act requires a state to provide a compelling justification before it may substantially burden the free exercise of religion. But just what is a substantial burden? In 1963, the Supreme Court said that putting someone to the choice of following the precepts of her religion and forfeiting benefits on the one hand, and abandoning one of the precepts of her religion in order to accept work on the other hand, is a substantial burden. And the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit explained in 1988 that for a city to force a house of worship to move outside city limits and forbid ministry-owned property to be used for religious services substantially burdens religious liberty. The 11th Circuit in 2004 explained that a substantial burden is akin to significant pressure which directly coerces the religious adherent to conform his or her behavior accordingly, and can result from pressure that tends to force adherents to forego religious precepts or from pressure that mandates religious conduct. In 2007, the First Circuit defined substantial burden as one that puts substantial pressure on an adherent to modify his behavior and to violate his beliefs. Our country's long-standing dedication to freedom carefully protects the right of citizens to freely exercise their religion, free from a government-imposed substantial burden. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and I am sitting in the studio in Kirby's chair because Kirby is in San Antonio at the Republicans' Texas Convention. And with me on the line now is Jonathan Saenz, who is president of Texas Values. And that is a nonprofit group dedicated to preserving and advancing a culture of family values in the state of Texas. He's a frequent guest here on Point of View. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Penna. Great to be with you.
It's good to have you. Are you in San Antonio, too?
Yes, ma'am. I'll try to go say hello to Kirby.
Yes, he'd, I'm sure, love to see you and talk. And, you know, the reason I wanted to talk with you today is not because of going to the convention, although I'd love to hear what you hope is accomplished on your issues there. but because of an article that you wrote, and it had to do with, we've been talking a lot here in Point of View about the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision and how it was a great decision for the baker, Jack Phillips, and certainly we applaud it. And you say in your article that it's going to go a long way to helping Texas lawmakers pass state law protection on these specific religious freedom attacks from local government laws. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, absolutely. Well, I think people are well aware, particularly Christians, that for many years there have been growing attacks on people of faith, individuals, private business owners, and those are based on government laws. People are using government laws to punish people who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And it can happen in a lot of different settings, but there are laws that put in place special protection for sexual orientation and gender identity. Most of them are at the local level. Like in Texas, there's a law like that in Dallas. There's a law like that in Austin. There's a law like that in San Antonio. And so they use these laws to punish people of faith. They use those laws and say, because you will not design a cake with a message that you disagree with based on your religious beliefs, this law says that's discrimination, so we're going to punish you, we're going to fine you. And they proposed a law like this at the legislature, a Democrat did, that would have put someone in jail if they just wanted to do things based on the beliefs that marriage between a man and a woman. And so there's been a growing concern that we need state law that makes it clear that when it comes to religious freedom issue, it also applies to these type of settings when it comes to your belief that marriage is between a man and a woman.
I noticed in an article, this was right after the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision came out. It was an article written by Daniel Horowitz, and it was entitled, "Here's How to Use the Masterpiece Cake Shop Decision to Save the First Amendment." So I think this is what you're talking about. And he said, he asked this question, why is Mississippi the only state in the union with a solid religious liberty law in place to protect against anti-conscience coercion of private property owners? They passed that, and Republicans control numerous state governments like Texas, rather than. And so anyway, I'm not going to read the rest. But is this what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. As a matter of fact, there was a legislation filed modeled after Mississippi in the state of Texas last year by State Representative Matt Schaefer. We're likely to see something of that detail come back during the 2019 legislation. But it's important for people to realize it's in response to the growing attacks on people of faith and the growing attacks on people that have the religious view that marriage is between a man and a woman. This is a view that most of our country has held for many years. We've seen, maybe some shiftings in the culture or whatever, but we're talking about recently, and it hasn't changed what the Bible says. It hasn't changed what many Christians believe. They still have that belief. And so, if you have that religious belief, the government should be punishing you. Look, people are getting married of the same sex. This isn't about preventing anyone from having a wedding ceremony or loving whoever they want or do whatever they want in their bedroom. But when you then go into someone's private bake shop and try to tell them what to do, you then try to punish them, put them in jail, fine them. The government's going too far. And that's what happened in the Masterpiece Cake Shop. But the reason it's necessary for state legislation is because some people don't think that religious freedom protection extends on these issues unless it's very specific in state law. They will manipulate, they will lead people to believe they don't have those protections. You remember a few years ago, pastors weren't sure if they would be hauled into court when it came to certain marriage decisions that they did not want to perform if the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage.
That's right. Now things are not assumed. They have to be spelled out, right?
That's exactly right. Mississippi did it. It's been challenged in court and upheld, so we know you can do it. We know that Mississippi includes the federal district Fifth Circuit, which Texas is a part of, so we've got relevant precedent for the state of Texas. And now that someone like Joe Strauss and other people are not in the way of these type of things, I think you're going to see the state legislature come back and make it very clear on these issues, and it's important. It's timely, and I think that's what we should expect to see.
Jonathan, what do you expect at the convention? Do you expect anything, progress or communications by those running for office about the issues that you hold so dear, like these issues of religious liberty?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the religious liberty issue is, it's one of the most talked about. You're talking about a major Supreme Court decision last week where you had a clear winner and a clear loser, if you will. Christian cake baker Jack Phillips won. The attack on religious freedom lost, and that attack was based on government officials doing that. And so, as a matter of fact, we've got a Facebook Live session that starts at 2 p.m. today. We're going to have Attorney General Ken Paxton on. He's going to talk about this issue. Mike Toth, who's running for Court of Appeals, who worked in the Attorney General's office, he'll likely have something to say about it. So will Matt Schaefer, a state representative. Oh, and by the way, Penna, tomorrow at the state convention at booth 417, we are serving free wedding cake as a way to celebrate religious freedom on this issue.
I love it, Jonathan. You're creative. Well, okay, people can listen to your Facebook Live session and keep Point of View on the radio. How about that? Because it's all going to be happening.
That's right.
Well, actually, maybe the Dallas people will be done anyway, so that's good. Well, what about privacy? Next, I asked Matt Rinaldi about what he expected in the next session in the last segment when he was with us. What about that privacy bill that passed the Senate but didn't make it in the House? What do you expect to see in the next session? And is there going to be talk about that, do you think, at the convention?
Yeah, well, that's a hot issue, too. As a matter of fact, if you want to dial up your email or your text message to your Senate Republican Executive Committee, your SREC member, your state rep, or the people that are serving on the Legislative Priorities Committee for the Republican Party of Texas, because they're voting on it this afternoon, what items are going to be the priority for coming legislative session. And I'm hearing the privacy issue is getting tons of support, but there's a couple of holdouts, and so we need a strong little quick push. If whoever you know that's a Republican delegate, text them, email them right now, and tell them you want privacy to be on the legislative priorities list. Nicole Hutchins is doing great work on that. And there's a lot of attention on it because we continue to see more stories. We continue to see more stories of boys now on the girls' track team or the girls' athletic team, men that are in the women's bathroom. We continue to see more and more incidents, and we see these school districts that are not telling parents ahead of time that behind closed doors they're changing their policy. The way that parents are finding out about the change is their daughters are coming home and saying, "Daddy, there was a boy in my bathroom today." And that's what they did in Dripping Springs, southwest of Austin. That's what they are doing up in Coppell. That's what they're doing in San Antonio school districts. And so the only way to handle this issue is to have a clear, consistent law across the state that says you cannot have those kind of laws in the public school and other public buildings that allow biological men and boys to go into the girls' bathrooms. And it also provides that you can have one bathroom, though, or how many bathrooms where you can accommodate people that's a private stall. But if it's a multi-stall, it should be clear that it's based on biological sex, boy and girl, but you can accommodate them in a multi-stall. If people want to see that, txvalues.org is our website.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. I hope and pray you have a great convention.
Thanks, Ben. We love you. See you.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We have so much more. This is the 3-year anniversary of that fateful Obergefell decision. We're going to talk about it in the next segment and more.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
We are so glad you're with us for Point of View today, and I am in this host chair today because Kirby Anderson is in San Antonio, Texas, at the Texas Republican State Convention. I forgot to ask if he's a delegate, but he is a precinct chair, and he always goes to the conventions. And, you know, he's a great example to all of us to be involved, because the only way you can really have your say-so, we can complain all we want. We do a lot of that here on Point of View. But you can make a positive difference by being involved in your own state, and that's what he's doing right now. But, you know, I wanted to ask you, and I'm switching gears for those of you who have been with us the last hour, from the same-sex marriage Obergefell decision, but we'll get back to it. But have you heard of the Jesus film? I bet there's hardly anyone listening who's in a church or religious that hasn't. It's the most, it's the most widely distributed film in history, seen by billions of people worldwide. And today we're going to talk about an effort to get this out. Of course, I said worldwide, but to get it out to 60 million homes here in the U.S., when you multiply that by the number of people in the homes, it's getting great coverage. And it's just an effort. It's being really actually initiated by an organization called Christ for All Peoples. And I just want to bring in their Chief Financial Officer, Scott Baller, to discuss it, because it's just an interesting effort that is sort of grassroots, but it's also well coordinated, and I love things like that. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be part of the show. We love listening to it, and all you guys do.
Well, Scott, tell us about this new effort. I just heard about it a few weeks ago to get the Jesus film, and it's really 3 films on one DVD, but the famous Jesus film is part of that, out to all these homes. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So in the fall, a group of people got together and obviously concerned about a lot of things going on in our country, right? We've just been talking about some of the recent cases that have came forward and things going on in Texas here with, locker rooms and everything, and just really felt like we had to do something even beyond that. I love those organizations. I know the court system's a big part of what we need to be really focusing on. I've been involved with Alliance Defending Freedom and other groups for a while, but we really felt like, hey, what can we do from the church level to really try to help out and change this trend? And that trend that's happening right now is that we're seeing on net about 2 million Christians a year leaving the faith. And that's scary for me, and I think it should be for all of us. And so the idea was, how can we change that? How can we really try to bring the gospel to more people in an easy way, a way that's cost-effective, and a way that anyone can do it? And that's the key. I'm not a pastor. I'm a lay person. I've shared my faith a lot. I was with crew staff in Russia for a while, but the deal is how can we do that? How can we get the person that's in the pew to come out, get in there, and share their faith? And statistics show us through Barna and through some other groups that there's really only about 3% of church-going members that feel comfortable sharing their faith on a day-to-day basis. And so that's a very small amount. And so this group this last fall came together and said, how can we do that? And as we're looking at different tools, the Jesus film, as you mentioned, is an incredible tool. It's been shown more than any other film in the history of the world. And it's got such a powerful message that it's incredible. And the other thing that's great about it, it's in over 1,600 different languages. So as we know in the United States, we have a lot of different people that are coming here that live here from all over the world. And that's what's so unique about our country and so great about it as well. And so this tool is something that's an incredible tool. And so what happened is over December timeframe, we partnered with Jesus Film and we came together and produced a new version of the Jesus Film. And so it's 3 movies in one. It has the traditional Jesus Film one, which has been redigitized and so forth since its original mastering. It has the children's Jesus Film, which is a relatively new film, and it's an incredibly powerful tool for children that leads them through the process in a children's point of view of the message of the gospel. And then the last one is Magdalena, which is a women's version of it. And all 3 of those are on this one DVD. The DVD itself is in 8 different languages. So each one of those movies is in 8 different languages. That covers about over 97% of the United States.
Yeah, one would hope so.
Yeah. And so, you can take it in a home and they're either going to speak it in one of those languages. And then the great part about it, too, is, as I mentioned earlier, it's in 1,600 languages. And so on the back, there's a place where you can go stream the movie in any of those languages you want.
Well, I don't know if anybody can just get the camera on me, but I've got this Jesus Film to show you. This is it. And what a powerful tool, Scott, as you mentioned, that, really to get this in homes is going to be a huge ministry. I love the strategy here of going from grassroots. So how are you going to go from grassroots? How are you going to get this out?
That's a great question. So the idea is this. First off, we want to take away any things that are going to be inhibitors of a church or organization wanting to do it. So the first part of it is we are fully funded, and so it's completely free what we provide all the churches.
So they get free Jesus Films.
That is correct.
And materials.
What we do is we ask them to adopt an area, what we're calling an area of gospel responsibility. And so that can be a neighborhood of 100. It could be the zip code they live in. It could be a city. It could be different things. And so they adopt that, and then we basically provide them. It's shipped directly to the churches or the organizations. They will get bags. They'll get some different tracks that are provided to us by Crew and by Every Home for Christ, and then they'll get the DVDs. And so example is if they do, let's say they want to do the neighborhood of 500 around their church, they would get a packet of 500 of all those things, and then also they get maps that show them where the houses are, where the people are, and the opportunity then to go out and do this.
Okay, I don't have much time before the break, Scott, but Scott Baller is with me, and he is with Christ for All Peoples, and he's talking about a national effort, a nationwide effort here in the U.S., but it's also done city by city, and Scott is a leader for Texas. So we're broadcasting around the country, but also in Texas. So Scott, after the break, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about the local efforts. I know there's already been a successful effort in Orlando, Florida, and there's been another one called Saturate SoCal in California. And I think that we're going to be having one in Dallas where I sit soon, and just all over the country. So Scott Baller is with me, and he's going to continue to talk about this. But if you want to find out more, go to pointofview.net, and that will lead you through to really what you need to know about this effort if you want to be involved. That's what, even from my earliest days as a Christian, Campus Crusade, or now it's Crew, has always just been innovative about helping people have tools to share the gospel. You don't really have an excuse if you could just hand them a DVD, find out a way to do that. And, doing it through churches is just wonderful. It's the way God called us to do things. So Scott's going to continue to explain this after the break. We hope you'll stay with us during the break. Go to pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the questions many liberals are asking these days is what happened to Alan Dershowitz. The emeritus Harvard law professor has been critical of the Mueller investigation and talks about the criminalization of politics in his most recent book. But the real question should be reversed. What happened to all the liberals who used to demand that our civil liberties be protected by government? Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of how liberals were riding high after the Watergate scandal. Even before that, they were leading the charge in criticizing the overreach of presidents and their bureaucracies like the FBI and the CIA. They rightly criticized the intelligence agencies for spying on American citizens. Those days are but a distant memory now. Liberal politicians have downplayed or excused Watergate-like abuses of power by the former Barack Obama administration. Liberal journalists apparently have few concerns that the FBI apparently used at least one secret informant to gather information about the 2016 Trump campaign. And they didn't seem too bothered about the national security team unmasking the names of U.S. citizens. Civil libertarians seem indifferent that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign paid a foreign agent, Christopher Steele, to compile dirt on Republican candidate Donald Trump, and that the details of the dossier were leaked. There is, of course, much more than this, but even this very short summary illustrates the remarkable change not in Alan Dershowitz, but in the liberal establishment. They believe that President Trump is a danger and therefore turn a blind eye to abuses they used to criticize just a few years ago. That's why they should really be asking, what happened to us? I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're opening up the phones at 800-351-1212. If you have a question or comment for Scott Baller about this distribution effort, it's called Saturate USA or Saturate whatever city you're in. They already had Saturate Orlando. And Scott Baller, tell us just sort of how it worked. People can get a picture of it that way.
Yeah, so it's simple. You can go out to saturateusa.org. You can sign up, and it doesn't have to just be by city. We have people in Oklahoma taking counties. We have people up in New England taking cities. And the goal is to saturate the United States. We want to do 60 million homes in the next 3 years by the end of 2020. And so, a good example, like you said, we had Orlando go where 770,000 homes have been saturated in Orlando within about a 3-month period. We have Saturate Southern California, which is 8 counties there they're doing. It represents about 26 million people. And so opportunities all around. It's simple. It's get excited, get out there, share the gospel. We're not telling you how you have to do it. We're just providing the mechanism to do that. And for me as a layperson, it's exciting because I don't have to know all the answers. I can either go hang it on a door, or I can knock on a door and talk to someone, or I can do it at the mall, or I can give it to my server in the restaurant that serves me. So that's the concept. It's very simple.
So the organization, I think, as you mentioned, is done through the church, and then the church benefits too, right?
Yeah, we ask 2 things. This is really all we ask is, one, that everything they distribute out has the local church information in it. Because the object is to get them back to the local church, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we want. This isn't about our organization or anyone else. It's about the local church. The second thing we ask is that they report back to us how it went. provide us pictures, videos, whatever, so that we can encourage others to want to do the same thing. I'm actually in Spokane, Washington right now, and in about 30 minutes, I'm going to be in front of about 150 pastors that have agreed that they're going to saturate Spokane this fall. And as you mentioned, we have Dallas starting up this year. We've got actually Saturate Texas is going to be going. It's going to be announced here shortly. We've got Southern California. We've got Albuquerque. We've got all over the United States. Cities are coming on board, and counties and churches that want to share the gospel and let people know the incredible message of our Lord and Savior.
You can go to our website, pointofview.net, and click through to Scott Ball. We have Scott's picture, and we also have information about the Jesus Film Project. But since we're broadcasting, Scott, in not only across the country, but in Texas and Dallas specifically, I'm sitting in Dallas, it's timely that you've got an effort for Texas and Dallas coming up soon. So can you tell our listeners more how they can get involved in that?
Yeah, so what they can do is they go to saturateusa.org, and they can sign up there saying they want to be part of the effort. And then what we will do is there will be a big kickoff meeting for most of the big cities, so like Dallas, Houston, those, and we'll get them invited to that meeting, and we'll get them there, and they can start getting involved. And the way it works is, like I said, they adopt an area. Most of the churches will adopt like a zip code, and then we'll have a launch date and so forth. And so, for instance, we'll have a launch date, and usually we try to saturate a city within about a 3 to 6 month period. But, Orlando was an example. I said 770,000 people or homes. That's actually about 2.4 million people. So Dallas is going to be about 1.4 million homes as an example to saturate that.
I noticed that Josh McDowell spoke at the gathering for, I think it was Saturate SoCal. He is very high on this, isn't he? He is.
Josh is actually on our board and also just totally believes in this message. The great thing that Josh brings is what's so amazing about this idea is it's for everyone. I was in Orlando. I walked houses with a 75-year-old lady. I could hardly stay up with her. She was so excited to do this. Josh sees that youth groups, this is a great mechanism for youth groups because we're seeing youth groups taking this on and encouraging the rest of the church to get out and share their faith. And so it's for everyone. We even have in Tampa, we have an organization that has special needs kids that they're going to actually be part of this. They're going to help put the packets together at local churches. So it's an opportunity for the whole church to get involved. And what we're seeing from pastors and stuff is this is just empowering their members to get out and share their faith in whatever way they feel comfortable. And that's really the key.
Scott, on this program, we discuss so many issues and problems that are plaguing the country. And a lot of times what we come down to at the end is we just need revival. And, then you wonder, well, how does revival happen? And, of course, God causes revival through his Holy Spirit, but he uses people. And this almost sounds like God could be using this effort to raise up an army and actually bring, biblical literacy. There's a problem in the church. So I think this film is for Christians, too, because you can learn the gospel through a film. Some people don't like to read. So
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
So I see this as, going so much hand in hand with all the involvement that we encourage here on this program to just have this tool. I love the idea. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And maybe unless you have another comment to make or encouragement, I'll let you go so you can go speak to the pastors.
Well, all I ask is, hey, pray for this meeting, that they get charged up and they're excited about it, and pray for the other opportunities that, we can really, really start a revival. And it all starts with prayer. We all know that. And what we're seeing is there's so many great Americans that are out there that love our country and want better. And through prayer and through things like this, we can do it. And so it's just all of us partnering together and working together as a body to spread the word of Jesus Christ.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Scott, and for what you're doing, and I pray your speech goes well.
Thank you. Hey, we appreciate you and appreciate your show. Keep up the great work.
Okay, and that's Scott Baller, and the organization is Christ for All Peoples, and the whole effort, Saturate USA, an absolutely very simple idea, and I think will be very effective, and you can find out more, especially if you haven't been listening this whole entire to this interview, at pointofview.net. There's some information there for you. And the Jesus film, I mean, who hasn't heard of it? Getting it out to 60 million homes is a worthy cause. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, back to, a more depressing subject. 3 years ago, in June of 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that states didn't get to have laws protecting marriage anymore, that same-sex marriage is going to be the law of the land in every state all across America. That was the Obergefell versus Hodges decision. And we see it in so many ways, things that it affects in our country. Certainly gave impetus to all the attacks on Christians' rights, religious liberty, Christian businesses. I think the transgender demands rose precipitously after that. And so later in the program, I'm going to be joined by a former Alabama Supreme Court justice named Glenn Murdock. And he is going to talk about the decision and its implications, and probably in a way that you've never heard before. I think you're going to get some insight into just the deep repercussions in so many ways. I mean, Kelly Shackelford talks about it here on Point of View, and all the attorneys from First Liberty Institute. But I think this is, and they'll, I'm sure, agree with Justice Murdock, but I don't know that he's just had some time since he retired from the Alabama Supreme Court to put this together. And I met him a few weeks ago, so I'm delighted to bring him to the microphone. He will be here in a few minutes, or about 30 minutes. But I think this next segment, we're going to kind of set the stage for that. And so I hope that that you'll stick with us for that. And one way we are going to set the stage is by an article that I posted at pointofview.net. And by the way, let me just send you to pointofview.net today, because it's filled with resources. It has all the many guests that we've had today. It has their pictures and bios, their organizations' websites, and it has a picture of Justice Murdock and a decision. When he was on the Alabama Supreme Court, they decided their marriage law in Alabama was challenged, and it was upheld. And when it was upheld, it was said to be, that opinion was said to be powerfully worded. And so we posted that next to Justice Murdock's picture, so you can see that. That's a resource. Also an article, Same-Sex Marriage Doesn't Affect Me, and this is by a former lesbian who wrote about the Obergefell decision too. And I think it's, we're going to kind of talk about that article, but that's there at pointofview.net. And also, and certainly had to get involved in the Jesus Film Project, but our donate button is there. And that's the appeal I want to make to you right now, because we're coming up on our fiscal year end, and we need your support. Through the summer is hard, and also just at fiscal year end, we need to make some decisions. So we need to know how well you're going to be supporting us. So we ask that you go to the donate button and dig deep for the most generous gift you can give, and we will be right back.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blight had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blight get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. The phones are open, 800-351-1212. I was going through some old files at my home recently, and I came upon a file, and I opened it up, and there was a dog-eared piece of paper. It's kind of yellow now. That was in there. It's from 1993, and here's the title. 1993, March on Washington, Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Platform Demands. They didn't have the T in the Q, transgender and queer, and all the other letters that go after LGB. Back then, they do now. But, I mean, maybe this is another show and tell for people who are listening online. I'll show you the piece of paper, and you can see it is dog-eared. And this, I remember this. We used this in radio, and I wasn't even involved with Point of View back then. But this is the goals of the lesbian, gay, and bisexual movement back then. And so I just want to read them to you, and I think it's going to amaze you how many have already been achieved. Number 1, elimination of all laws prohibiting sodomy, transgendered expression, cross-dressing, and sadomasochism. Well, it wasn't long after that they struck down the sodomy law in the nation. The Supreme Court struck it down. So there we go. That was number 1. Number 2, lower the age of consent for homosexual and heterosexual sex. I don't think they've achieved that yet. Hopefully they never do. Implementation, this is number 3, of homosexual, bisexual, and transgendered curriculum at all levels of education. I would say, I could ask an educational expert, probably in public schools, they're probably 80% there. This is just throughout many, especially the health curriculums. And so, they've gone a long way. And this is where they wanted to get our children. And I think this is one of the things that we concentrated on back then. As a matter of fact, in Texas, and this piece of paper was put out by the American Family Association of Texas, and they're in Dallas County. And we were fighting then homosexuality in the curriculum. And we actually were very successful in getting a lot of the references out back then. My kids were in elementary school, so I was paying attention to the curriculum, and I know we were very successful then. I have no idea. We need to do some radio on it, on where we are on a lot of that. But many of these curricula come out of the federal government. So, and the gay groups have a lot of power. Okay, number 4, legalization of homosexual marriages. And back then, that was out there. We didn't really think that was possible. Marriage is marriage between one man and one woman. And even when we started talking about it back in the mid-'90s, most people didn't believe us. I remember giving a speech at the Dallas Country Club, and, I knew about the threat of it. I knew people that could explain why it was a possibility, how they were going to do this. So I explained this to the people there, and I remember there was some feedback like, this was out there. She talks too much about this issue. There are other issues, and this will never happen. And it did. 3 years ago, it was actually done at the Supreme Court level across the nation. Marriage was a state issue, but now it's not. States still marry you, but they have to marry same-sex couples now because of the Supreme Court decision in Obergefell versus Hodges. Okay, number 5, custody, adoption, and foster care rights. And let me just go back in case you just tuned in. This is the 1993 March on Washington lesbian, gay, and bisexual platform demands. Number 5 in the demands, custody, adoption, and foster care rights for homosexuals, lesbians, and transgendered people. Well, we're seeing Catholic charities kicked out of cities where they insist that they are not going to place children with same-sex couples. They're closed down because certain laws in certain cities and states demand that they do this. So that's happening. They've met that goal in part. Redefinition of family to include the full diversity of all family structures. 2 moms, 2 dads. Now in Canada, it's like 3 parents sometimes. So they've gone a long way toward this one. Okay, number 6, access to all programs of the boy. This is almost making me cry when I think about how successful this has been. Access to all programs of the Boy Scouts of America. Well, the Boy Scouts of America isn't even the Boy Scouts anymore because of this agenda. It now includes girls. It has homosexual scout leaders and homosexual members. And they went to the Supreme Court to win the right not to have to do that, but they still did it. Number 7, affirmative action for homosexuals and lesbians. Well, I think, we have that now. I mean, we don't have ENDA, Employment Non-Discrimination Law. That never passed in the Congress. But many cities have it. It's certainly still, I would say this is not achieved yet. But a lot of companies say it's fine, we'll hire homosexuals. It's just we don't want to have to do things that violate our faith. For instance, Jack Phillips. Actually not Jack Phillips, Baronelle Stutzman. She's another wedding vendor. Her case they're trying to get into the Supreme Court. And she hires homosexuals in her shop, but she refused to make a cake for a same-sex couple for their marriage. And she's just about going to lose everything unless she gets a good decision at the Supreme Court. And I don't know if they're going to take her case or not. So affirmative action, it's an interesting one. Not quite achieved, but certainly on the way. Number 8, inclusion of inclusion of sex change operations under a universal health care plan. Well, it was in the military, but President Trump has come in and they've changed the transgender policy. So this is not going to have to be included in our U.S. military medical programs. So we've dodged that. This one's not achieved yet. Thank you, Lord, by the grace of God. But I think we can get some experts on to talk about how they're trying that. Let's stop that for sure. Number 9, abortion on demand for all people without restriction and regardless of age. We've made a lot of good progress in the pro-life movement and in the idea that taxpayers would have to pay for abortion. And we've, in many states, this is the one positive, the one that makes me very happy and kind of dries the tears a little, that we have done very well across America in various states in limiting abortions, bringing it back to the 5-month mark and things like that. Not nationwide, but across the nation. So thank you, Lord, for that. Number 10, a national needle exchange program. The AIDS was big back then. So these are the platform demands, and it's pretty sobering to think of how many of these have been achieved. And, I think, though, the one that I really didn't expect, but then I did after it started kind of going state by state, was the decision by Obergefell. Because in the states, many were, in fact, more than, I think it was 31 states, passed laws because this started to be a reality. They passed laws saying marriages between a man and a woman, and they protected religious liberty, they protected pastors and business owners and all of that. It was called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act. We also had one federally. That was struck down by the Obergefell decision. And so now we have same-sex marriage, and it's the law of the land. So we're going to talk in the next segment a little bit about that decision. Let's just kind of go back 3 years and talk about it. We'll have some facts in our brains then, so that we can listen to Justice Murdock when he joins us to talk about the future. Maybe he'll give us a little history and he'll talk about the future. But I also want to mention the article that I put up. You can maybe grab it if you're near a computer at pointofview.net. It's by Linda Wall. Same-sex marriage doesn't affect me. I found it at Barbed Wire. And we will take your call. I promise I'll take your calls during this discussion so that we can hear from you too. It's the number's 800-351-1212. And again, I want to mention that we have a website that's packed with information today, bios and pictures of our guests. It'd be very interesting to you. And also, the website gives you the opportunity to donate to Point of View. And we hope and pray that you will make that decision too, to help us to continue our broadcasts and to even enhance them, depending on how generous listeners are here at year-end, fiscal year-end for Point of View. So do that during the break, and we will be right back with some more discussion of the momentous Supreme Court case of 3 years ago, Obergefell versus Hodges. We'll be back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act requires a state to provide a compelling justification before it may substantially burden the free exercise of religion. But just what is a substantial burden? In 1963, the Supreme Court said that putting someone to the choice of following the precepts of her religion and forfeiting benefits on the one hand, and abandoning one of the precepts of her religion in order to accept work on the other hand, is a substantial burden. And the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit explained in 1988 that for a city to force a house of worship to move outside city limits and forbid ministry-owned property to be used for religious services substantially burdens religious liberty. The 11th Circuit in 2004 explained that a substantial burden is akin to significant pressure which directly coerces the religious adherent to conform his or her behavior accordingly, and can result from pressure that tends to force adherents to forego religious precepts or from pressure that mandates religious conduct. In 2007, the First Circuit defined substantial burden as one that puts substantial pressure on an adherent to modify his behavior and to violate his beliefs. Our country's long-standing dedication to freedom carefully protects the right of citizens to freely exercise their religion, free from a government-imposed substantial burden. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We are taking your calls at 800-351-1212. I guess the question would be, how has the decision 3 years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court making same-sex marriage law of the land affected you, or have you seen effects from that? And we are taking your calls again. I'll give the number one more time, 800-351-1212. Let's take a call from Palm Springs, California. Ailey is there. Ailey, am I pronouncing your name right? Ailey, are you there? Hi, Ailey. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
What's your comment?
My comment?
Yes.
I think God is love. And if these preachers are going to preach against gay people, we are born the way we are. We never asked. It is not a choice. I've worked in mental health for 25 years, and I have never seen so much hate, and hate is going to destroy us all, not just one. It's just real sad and pitiful, and I'm glad that I'm not going to live much longer because I've been sick. And but I am transgender, and I think people need to get over it, mind their own business, and move over. I am anti-religious. I am now a socialist and an atheist because of what y'all are doing.
Ailey, first of all, I'm sorry that you are ill, and actually, I think our listeners can agree in prayer for your health and your life, because you don't need to maybe surrender to not living much longer. I don't know how relative that is, but we hope that you feel better. But Ailey, can you tell us your story? Can you tell us your story?
Yeah, but man, I have had a good life, and I don't feel sorry for myself. I think my mother wanted me to be a girl, and I'm not a girl. My daddy was a child molester and had children by hook and drove my mother crazy, and I've been there and done that, but I'm a survivor. I love myself, and people need to love themselves and love one another. There's always someone worse off than we are. We need to love each other no matter what we are, who we are, or where we came from. I am not a prejudiced person, but I have really been through the mill. I have been attacked. I've had knives, guns pulled on me. I have been hit in the head with Pepsi bottles. And I just think all of this, church people can help relieve a lot of this pressure and hatred that is going on in America. And this hate is going to be, look at all of the school shootings and the mental illness and the homelessness. And a lot of homeless people are gay, LGBT people, and they've been, and what's real sad about it, the best friend I ever had, his parents, he was 14 or 17 years old, his parents threw him out of the home, and he lived home, and I don't know what happened to him, but that breaks my heart. You know, this needs to be solved a more peaceful way. If you don't like a person... Hey,
Ailey, let me ask you a question, because you've listed a lot of problems, and I don't think they're caused by the church, but I would love the... if you've got a more peaceful way, you know, first of all, what's the core problem you think there is? Just somebody disagreeing with people changing their gender? Is that the problem?
That might be I think that's a big problem.
It's not okay to disagree with that? If you disagreed without violence, without hateful rhetoric, if you just disagree, is that okay?
Yeah, well, I think we should be able to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But I do think that a person has a right to do anything with their body, including a woman should have the right to abortion if she thinks it's going to affect her health financially, mentally, or physically. I don't know. I just think being a mental health nurse, that I worked in Texas State Hospital for 25 years, I just think that a lot of this is causing a lot of mental illness. I don't know what you'd call it, hatred or prejudice. I think a lot of it is ignorance, and I think church people can do better and show more respect and love, and shouldn't be preaching so much against sex change and gay marriage. I think a person has the right to do what they want to do in life, and so they can be happy. Happiness is hard to find. You can't buy love. You can't buy health and happiness.
No, you can't. Listen, Ailey, I just appreciate you sharing. It sort of gives us an insight, and I'm sorry for sort of your upbringing. That's tragic, but
real sad.
Yeah,
yes,
but
yes,
you know,
yes.
you mentioned coexisting, and I just totally agree with that concept, because you want to live the way that you live. You've changed your sexual. I don't know if you've had surgery or anything, but...
No, I have not. I'm a pre-op, and it's not for everyone. That's another story. The doctors that have analyzed me for 2 hours said I was the eighth wonder of the world. My mother wanted to be a girl, and the doctors now have... They need to do a survey on this sort of thing, this transgender thing. The psychiatrist at Stanford University told me that my mother's trauma from daddy having babies out of wedlock... during Mama's 14th week of pregnancy triggered my sexual orientation. And I believe this.
Okay, wow. I'm sorry for you.
Arkansas is going through the same thing with her son. Now he is bi, and she was beat up by her husband, and she traumatized, and that caused him to be. I'm sure that this is what occurred.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. But as far as coexistence, I think the church definitely needs to find ways to be compassionate to people who are either homosexual or transgender. But I also think that the left that supports homosexuality, transgender, should allow the church to have its beliefs, which are rooted in their faith. So,
well, I believe they have.
We ought to be able to coexist and speak, maybe in the way that you and I are speaking right now, where we're not insulting each other.
right, more peaceful. Yes, I believe peace and I believe intelligence and understanding is the most important thing in the world, and I think everyone should go to school and get an education. I think we need to look at it this way. Things could always be worse. There's always something that could happen that could be worse. People need to take one day at a time and think tomorrow's going to be a better day. I'm super intelligent. I do writing, and by the way, I'm a caregiver, and I've done everything from AIDS caring, mental health, and everything, etc. And I'm just a real caring, peaceful person. I understand part of this, but I just do think that people. I think the more they talk about this should be allowed, that shouldn't be allowed, and all, I think it creates a lot of havoc, including among teenagers. And by the way, I wanted to mention this.
You know, we're almost at the end of the segment, so I don't want to cut you off. So just a quick comment, and then we'll have to go.
Very, very important. Gay and lesbian people are not child molesters. Most child molesters, all of them, in fact, are married men, including my father.
Yeah,
So
you've
let
had
me
that
say
experience.
that.
Ailey, thank you for speaking with us. I think that you've cast a net of understanding to people, so I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, wow, she has thought through a lot of things, and you know, we really pray for her as she has rejected, sounds like, faith, and she says that she's older, so let's pray for her that she'll come to know the truth in her remaining years. We're going to take a few more calls, and you know, you can really see that things that are so harmful, and rather than being considered deviant and in need of help, are now considered normal, and that's a tragedy. We'll take your calls in the next segment, and we'll continue our discussion after this. And again, let me point you to pointofview.net. I don't know if we're going to get to talk about the article, but you can read it. Same-sex marriage doesn't affect me. It's by a former lesbian, now a believer, because we have so many calls, and we're going to take them right after this. We'll be back.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking with us. This is the final hour today on Point of View. And I have set the stage already for our topic this hour, which is the post-Obergefell philosophy of truth. It sounds very deep, and it is. But our guest is going to take us there in a way that you will understand. He is retired Justice Glenn Murdock, and he was with the Alabama Supreme Court. He was elected statewide 3 times by the people of Alabama, and he there has been a strong voice for traditional values and also the rule of law. For 17 years, he served on Alabama's appellate courts. He retired just in January, and he's been speaking since then. He has spoken twice over the years to the National Day of Prayer observance in Washington, D.C., and we've got a full bank of phones, amazingly, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to try to get some of you, but just hang on if you can, because I'm very excited to speak with Justice Murdock. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's an honor to be with you, Penna. Thank you very much.
You know, we want to talk about the Obergefell decision of 3 years ago, and I've already mentioned and we've talked about the fact that this happened 3 years ago. A lot of things have changed, but there's more coming, and I think you have a really good take on the history, too. So, first of all, though, I want to take you to something I've also been talking about during the show, and that is we've placed your opinion. It was a supporting opinion from the case that came before the Alabama Supreme Court about marriage, where in Alabama you had a marriage law that was upheld. And I want you to just talk about that a little bit. We placed it on our website so people can read it, because I think it's worthy of reading.
Oh, well, well, thank you. I'm honored by that as well. This was a decision that we had to make as the Alabama Supreme Court 3 months before the Obergefell decision. And then again, after Obergefell, we had to decide what to do with our case following the Obergefell decision. But a federal court had ruled down in Mobile, Alabama, that Alabama's law that sanctioned only heterosexual marriage was unconstitutional, and it ordered a probate judge not to follow that law and instead to issue licenses to a same-sex couple. We came in after that in March of 2015. Obergefell was decided in June of 15. We came in March, and we said, well, the federal court has ruled us to that one probate judge and that one couple, but we have another case before us that is universally applicable, and as to all of the probate judges and all of the couples, our injunction was you must follow Alabama law. And so we issued that, and we wrote a 134-page opinion, which is probably not the opinion you posted on your website.
No.
But we did that because, number one, first and foremost, the case was before us. It's our duty to decide cases, and we had to decide this challenge to our law. But secondly, in the course of doing that, we were able to explain what we thought was the right way to look at the due process clause and the equal protection clause. And I think many people hoped that the Supreme Court might take a look at the way we had analyzed it. But that was not to be. So then Obergefell is decided. We all know what happened there in 2015. At least we know the result. Everyone knows the result. And then a few months later, we had to decide what to do with our case. And that is when that extra opinion that you're talking about, in which I spoke about truth and what was going on in Obergefell, was published.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified that. Now, this week, of course, we had the announcement of the decision in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. And, you know, we can applaud the decision because it protected the baker, Jack Phillips. Just give me a bit of analysis on that decision.
Sure. Well, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had one or two members that, in their opinions, in telling Jack Phillips that he had to bake a cake, he had to design and create a cake for the same-sex couple, they called his actions and his hiding behind his religious beliefs as something that was despicable, and they analogized what he was doing to the way the Nazis, in their opinion, hid behind religion to perpetrate the Holocaust. And as a result of that, Jack Phillips was ordered by the Colorado Commission on Civil Rights to surrender his business license. He had to pay he would have had to pay heavy fines. And get this, and I don't know if many of your listeners have heard this, he was ordered to participate in a re-education program. It's reminiscent of a re-education camp in the old Soviet Union or some sort of dystopian, futuristic novel. That just was amazing. Well, of course, he had a right under the First Amendment and both the Free Speech Clause and the Free Exercise Clause to bake the cake or not bake the cake, and to refuse to bake the cake if his participation and support of the wedding was contrary to his traditional and sincerely held religious beliefs. But what the Supreme Court did in the Phillips case is they really didn't decide whether he had that right or not. What they said was those comments by members of the commission show a particular hostility and a lack of respect for Mr. Phillips. And so we're going to throw out their decision, this particular decision. But unfortunately, as you and your listeners know, they did not reach the underlying issue of whether if that commission or any future state commission or board were to talk nicely and be respectful and not have such terrible analogies in its opinion, they might be able to say to the next Jack Phillips or the next photographer or florist, well, you don't get to adhere to your religious beliefs. You must use the fruits of your labor, the sweat of your brow, to participate in and be part of something that your religion teaches you is wrong. They did not make that decision. That decision, that underlying substantive decision, is for another day.
Yes. And so that case, Glenn, was working its way through the courts before Obergefell, and there are certainly going to be more of them because the left didn't wait. They came out with more attacks on religious liberty after Obergefell. And so that court decision that took place then in June of 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, is, I mean, it's so destructive. So I want you to explain, first of all,
yes,
just kind of the history of it. Go back to the founders a little bit, if you could.
All right. Well, first off, you're right. Obergefell is an important point on the calendar.
You know, Glenn, I got to interrupt because I just realized we're about at the end of this segment. We're going to have to leave it there and come back after our break. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if I dare mention this, but Senator Ted Cruz is supposed to join us later in the program, too. We think he'll be with us. But we will continue this discussion with Justice Glenn Murdock. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the questions many liberals are asking these days is what happened to Alan Dershowitz. the emeritus Harvard law professor has been critical of the Mueller investigation and talks about the criminalization of politics in his most recent book. But the real question should be reversed. What happened to all the liberals who used to demand that our civil liberties be protected by government? Victor Davis Hanson reminds us of how liberals were riding high after the Watergate scandal. Even before that, they were leading the charge in criticizing the overreach of presidents and their bureaucracies like the FBI and the CIA. They rightly criticized the intelligence agencies for spying on American citizens. Those days are but a distant memory now. Liberal politicians have downplayed or excused Watergate-like abuses of power by the former Barack Obama administration. Liberal journalists apparently have few concerns that the FBI apparently used at least one secret informant to gather information about the 2016 Trump campaign. And they didn't seem too bothered about the national security team unmasking the names of U.S. citizens. Civil libertarians seem indifferent that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign paid a foreign agent, Christopher Steele, to compile dirt on Republican candidate Donald Trump, and that the details of the dossier were leaked. There is, of course, much more than this, but even this very short summary illustrates the remarkable change not in Alan Dershowitz, but in the liberal establishment. They believe that President Trump is a danger and therefore turn a blind eye to abuses they used to criticize just a few years ago. That's why they should really be asking, what happened to us? I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and before we get back to Justice Murdock, and even Ted Cruz is supposed to call in, so one of those two will be on with us in a minute, and then we will continue the conversation with Justice Glenn Murdock. This is a little crazy, but it's just kind of the way it works sometimes when you have a U.S. senator wanting to join us, and they've called and wanted to share some things. So let's go now to Mary in South Carolina. Hi, Mary. Thanks for calling in.
Yes. Good evening. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for calling.
You can hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
I was calling in simply to say that I heard someone called in earlier who identified themselves as transgender, and it just broke my heart when they felt like the church, turned up a blind eye and, was found transgenders to be offensive. And I just wanted to speak to all those persons who are suffering with sexual identity in whatever form, to let them know that Jesus loves them, that we love them. And God's word is where they need to focus. To diligently seek the Lord, he said, for those who diligently seek him, they will find him. And in finding him, they will find out that, yes, we were all born into sin. Everyone was born into sin. But God says we can all be born again. We can all be born again and become new creations in Christ Jesus, where old things are passed away and all things become new. And to the churches, I feel strongly that if the church is going to preach condemnation against anything, that they should also preach redemption. And for all those, like
Absolutely.
I said, who are feeling lost and alone and whatever, know that Jesus loves them and the church does love them, but we all need to seek the Lord, seek Jesus to find the true and right way to get through this life.
A good word, Mary. Mary, thank you. I think we needed that because, boy, when I heard about her life and just all of her opinions and everything, I just, you really sense the heaviness of the lostness. And so thank you for calling in and giving us that encouragement. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Let's go now to Bob in Maine. Hi, Bob. Thanks for calling.
Hi, thank you. My heart goes out to that transgender woman that called, and I feel sorry that she was a victim. Many Christians are victims in many respects these days as well, and my heart goes out to them. But as far as the mental health field, she may be a secondary victim because the diagnostic and statistical manual that they use for diagnosing have succumbed to the culture and the academia world and political pressures and have changed the diagnosis for homosexuality from being a disorder all the way up to now it's a kind of a special category.
Right. You know what? I've got to jump in, Bob. I think the point is well taken, and I appreciate your call. Thank you so much for calling now. We are joined by U.S. Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Penna, great to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you, and I know you've been very busy, and so have we, talking about all the things that have happened this week. So I'm just going to, since I don't have long with you, get right to it and ask you your thinking about what went on in Singapore this week. I mean, I think sometimes we have to look at something that's sort of hard to look at with two flags together and one leader of the free world and another leader of a brutal dictatorship. But is there something unprecedented and disruptive taking place there, in your opinion?
Well, I think we should all approach the outcome of the summit and what Kim Jong-un is likely to do with deep skepticism. But that being said, we can surely be hopeful that this becomes a promising first step. I entered this summit with very deep skepticism because Kim, like his father and like his grandfather, has a many year history of lying over and over again, of being really the same empty promises to denuclearize, promises to stop developing nuclear weapons in exchange for billions of dollars in sanctions relief from the United States. And presidents of both parties have fallen for that ruse. And so I certainly urged President Trump before the summit the same empty promises that Kim has made in the past. Now, they came out of the summit with Kim signing an agreement, committing on the face of it to total denuclearization of North Korea. If that, in fact, happens, it would be historic, it would be groundbreaking, it would dramatically increase the national security of the United States. But what I've advised the president, Reagan, with regard to the Soviet Union, famously had a policy of trust but verify. What I've advised with North Korea is maybe don't even trust, just verify. So let's see what happens going forward. But at a minimum, I think we're seeing an illustration of the virtues of strength as a foreign policy dealing with dictators rather than the weakness and appeasement we saw for eight years of the Obama administration.
Does any agreement that takes place, I mean, you want to see it go to the Senate and ratified as a treaty?
Absolutely. If it's going to be a formal agreement that changes U.S. policy, I think the right way to do it is submit it to the Senate. And if it's a good agreement, if it's an agreement that advances U.S. national security interests and makes us safer, it should be able to get the two-thirds vote necessary to ratify.
And there needs to be a human rights component.
Well, I think human rights are very, very important, but it's worth breaking out. We tend to deal with different tiers of threats. The first and the paramount focus of U.S. foreign policy should be direct threats to our national security, direct threats to murdering Americans and murdering our allies. And so if we had an agreement that eliminated North Korea's nuclear weapons, that eliminated their ICBM stockpile, that would be a groundbreaking agreement. That would be a very important agreement. Now, I don't think it would be the end of what we would want to accomplish in time with North Korea, and Kim is unquestionably a brutal dictator. But we would certainly take an incremental improvement of getting rid of nuclear weapons if we could actually get that verifiably and be sure of it. And, there are many countries, sadly, that have horrific human rights records. China has a terrible human rights record, and yet we do business with China. We don't have crushing sanctions on China. I think the right approach to that is to continue to speak out against human rights approaches, to shine a light, to work to get a dictator to change. But we have traditionally handled those issues differently than we have direct national security threats to the United States of America.
Okay, I'm going to turn our attention, Senator Cruz, to trade, tariffs, and NAFTA. Can you just kind of make sense of what's going on? How do you feel about? I know that things are sort of up in the air, and we don't ever know where the president's going to land. Where should he land?
Well, they are certainly volatile right now. The most consistent concern that I hear from the Texas business community, that I hear from farmers and ranchers across Texas, is trade. And Texans are very concerned about what direction the country is going to go on trade. Texans are thrilled with the tax cut we passed in December of last year. They're thrilled with job-cutting, killing regulations being pulled back, but they're very concerned about trade. My view, let's take NAFTA renegotiation. NAFTA renegotiation could be a good thing or bad thing. If NAFTA renegotiation is used as a vehicle to open up the Mexican market, to open up the Canadian market, to expand international trade, that's a good thing. That's a good thing for Texas. It's a good thing for the country. It helps our farmers, our ranchers, our manufacturers, our small businesses. On the other hand, if NAFTA renegotiation is used to erect tariffs and barriers to the U.S. market, to restrict trade, that's a bad thing. That will hurt Texans. It will hurt Americans. And so what I have done with the president is repeatedly urge the president, the administration, to pursue the former path and not the latter. Expand trade, open up foreign markets. And the candid answer, Penna, is within the Trump administration. There are voices on both sides of that divide, and they're vigorously fighting it out right now. So I don't know the solution to be, but I'm going to continue to advocate in favor of opening up foreign markets so American farmers and ranchers and manufacturers and small businesses can continue to sell our goods and services.
Apparently, I have to let you go, but thank you so much, Senator Cruz, for joining me. We'll talk to you again.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blight had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We had that interlude, short interview with Senator Ted Cruz, and, you know, that kind of moved around today. His people kept calling and changing it. So we are back now with Justice Glenn Murdock, and thank you for your patience.
Certainly.
Let me just add a point right now, since we just spoke with a U.S. Senator, that there was a seat left open in Alabama by Jeff Sessions. It ended up, and we all know the story, that it's now held by a Democrat. And when I spoke with you and met you in person a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that you're kind of thinking over the idea of maybe running for that seat.
Well, that is one reason I resigned from the Supreme Court when I did. When you're a sitting justice, you just can't speak to the issues of the kind we're speaking about today. As a sitting justice, there are rules of ethics that govern you, and you're restricted. And, Penna, that's I believe in the last chapter of my life, that's what I am called to do. I think that's what I'm called to do. And whether that's as a U.S. Senator or whether that's talking to Penna Dexter on the radio, I don't know yet. My wife and I are praying about that and working through those issues. So I'd be grateful for prayer about that decision, certainly. Certainly.
And I'm glad that it's actually that God's will is that you talk to me today. So let's get to it.
Thank you.
And,
Sure.
This Obergefell decision that took place 3 years ago, we're kind of going back into American history a little bit, to where the founders, they didn't define liberty, but they articulated it. And all of a sudden, there's this big challenge to our religious liberty, our First Amendment rights. So kind of give me that progression a bit.
Sure. Well, I would do that in two parts. The first thing I would ask your listeners to do is just picture in their minds a timeline of American history, just like they look at in high school in their civics books. And they might even start with the Mayflower, and we know why the Pilgrims came over. And then there's a little vertical tick for 1776 and the Declaration of Independence. And the Constitution has a little vertical line on it. And you keep moving to the right, and you get to the War of 1812, and then the Civil War has a little tick, and then World War I, World War II, and then come up. You might even put a line in there for the Roe versus Wade decision. But then you come to 2015, and I would ask your listeners to imagine in their minds a dark, bold line vertically across the horizontal timeline. And the date at the bottom of it is June 26, 2015. Never before in the history of the United States, before that date, had the United States Supreme Court made a ruling for America that took that which every major religion deems a sin and elevated it to a constitutional right of such a nature as to require widespread acquiescence and even participation by men and women of faith in violation of their sincere and traditional religious beliefs. Now, you might say, well, what about Roe versus Wade? Well, yeah, that elevated something that most major religions deem a sin to a constitutional right, but it was not of a nature as to require widespread acquiescence and even participation by everyone in society. It was between a woman and whatever medical provider she could persuade to give her the abortion. Same on, you might think, well, what about the Dred Scott decision right before the Civil War, a few years before the war, that held that a slave was property? Well, that was directed just at some federal officials in Wisconsin, and it didn't require participation by men and women all over the country, and besides, that decision didn't stand. As we know, we fought a war over it. So Obergefell is different. It's the first time there's ever been a conflict between the right of free exercise of religion and some other purported right of the nature that case sets up. And so the threat to religious liberty is clear. The threat to marriage and to families and to religious liberty. I mean, in Alabama and in many states, Kentucky and many other states, judges and clerks who issued marriage licenses suddenly could not hold their offices or perform their tasks consistent with their sincerely held religious beliefs. In corporate America, now, you have to go through diversity training. You cannot articulate certain thoughts and beliefs openly, or you just will not get up the corporate ladder. In California, I'm sure you know about this, and many of your listeners do, there's a bill pending in the legislature that would make it illegal to pursue any business that involved what the legislature deemed hate speech, which means that you couldn't sell Bibles because the scriptures, some of them are deemed hate speech because they speak of homosexuality as a sin. You could not be a preacher and preach from the Bible, or at least not all of it, and stay in business in California under this bill. And then the last example I would just throw out before we talk about how we got to Obergefell is, I would just throw this out. Much more is to come, I think, from Obergefell, but as of today, right now, I would ask, where's the religious liberty for the mother or father who tucks their 7 or 8-year-old little boy or girl into bed tonight? They say prayers, and then the child asks mom or dad, hey, can 2 men marry? And mother or father stops, and they carefully explain God's view of marriage and the biblical view and what's right and wrong. And they exercise their religious freedom to pass on their values and faith to their child, only to have to wake up the next morning and put that same little girl or boy on a school bus to be taken to a public school where in some areas the school boards have dictated that teachers teach children just the opposite. And they have to sit at the feet of that authority figure for 8 hours. Where is the religious freedom for that mother or father in America today? And that is a result of the Obergefell decision. But you've asked a great question. How did we ever get to the Obergefell decision? Why is it so different? And so if it's okay,
Yeah, please do, because, people said, I spoke earlier in the program before you joined us. Back in the 90s, we would talk about the threat of same-sex marriage, and people I really didn't see that it could happen. So how did we get here?
Well, go back to the Phillips decision a moment. And you know how the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado called Jack Phillips a very humble, godly man, basically a bigot and narrow-minded? It's because we don't have a common value system in America anymore. And so we're not a churched people anymore. And so when they see someone trying to be restrictive in their exercise of their profession, they have so many people, perhaps the members of this commission, had no understanding of where he was coming from, what his frame of reference was. And so they had no choice but just to think perhaps that he was being a bigot. But it's deeper than that, as you've been suggesting, Penna. It's more fundamental than the loss of a common value system in America. The majority of the United States Supreme Court, I'm afraid, no longer has the same philosophy of truth that our founders had. Our founders believed that there was such a thing as truth, what my friend Art Lindsley uses as the title for his book, True Truth, an objectively discernible truth, an absolute truth as to the nature of man and morality and the physical world around us. Not that which is decided upon by each man in his own mind, or each woman in her own mind. A truth that comes from outside of man, that is external to man. It comes from an external source, if you will. And only because it's not dependent on each person deciding what their own truth is, and because it's external to that kind of mental exercise, it can be and is a truth that is universal for all men. And because it is external, comes from an external source, and therefore is universal to all men, it provides the basis for what we know as universal rights for all men, or what the framers in Philadelphia called unalienable rights.
Okay, I'm going to step in right now, and just so we can kind of end the thought for a moment, and we will be back for another segment. So truth isn't truth anymore. We can't rely on truth. It leaves us in a terrible place. We'll continue our discussion with Justice Glenn Murdock after this break. During the break, you might check out more about him at the website pointofview.net, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act requires a state to provide a compelling justification before it may substantially burden the free exercise of religion. But just what is a substantial burden? In 1963, the Supreme Court said that putting someone to the choice of following the precepts of her religion and forfeiting benefits on the one hand, and abandoning one of the precepts of her religion in order to accept work on the other hand, is a substantial burden. And the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit explained in 1988 that for a city to force a house of worship to move outside city limits and forbid ministry-owned property to be used for religious services substantially burdens religious liberty. The 11th Circuit in 2004 explained that a substantial burden is akin to significant pressure which directly coerces the religious adherent to conform his or her behavior accordingly, and can result from pressure that tends to force adherents to forego religious precepts or from pressure that mandates religious conduct. In 2007, the First Circuit defined substantial burden as one that puts substantial pressure on an adherent to modify his behavior and to violate his beliefs. Our country's long-standing dedication to freedom carefully protects the right of citizens to freely exercise their religion, free from a government-imposed substantial burden. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing our conversation with Justice Glenn Murdock, we've been talking about truth, and really there's sort of this personal truth now, but our country, Glenn, was designed to operate with people who believe in truth, the kind of truth that our Bible speaks, for instance. And so what happens when we can't have that anymore as a consensus?
Well, the Declaration of Independence, Penna, speaks specifically of the law of nature and nature's God. It speaks of our Creator as the source of our truth. It speaks of the universality of the truth by talking about all men being created equal, which, by the way, if you look around, it doesn't seem self-evident as the Declaration proclaims that all men are created equal, at least not to me. I see people with all different types of talents, and some with money, some without, some with power, and some are sickly, and some are healthy, and some are strong, and some are weak. And if you look around, some have great intellect and some don't. But they're the founders talking about all men being created equal. And I suggest that it was in a spiritual sense that they were speaking to that. And John Adams said that the Constitution was made for moral and religious people and wholly inadequate for any other. That was the truth of our founders, the philosophy of truth, that there is an objective reality to the world around us. It doesn't depend on what you and I think about this table. It's solid, and we can't make it otherwise just by thinking it's otherwise. And as part of that objective reality, there's an objectively discernible truth that is universal for all men, and it's for man to discover that truth. And for most of the history of this nation, it was this philosophy of truth that informed our law and our liberty and our understanding of our rights. It was the premise of American law that man can discover this objectively discernible truth regarding his nature and morality in the world around us. But now, at that dark line on our timeline when 2015 came and Obergefell was decided, we're now told that we're in a new orthodoxy. Someone used the word a new cosmology. Basically, the court says
sort of a post-Obergefell cosmology.
Yeah, you could put everything before Obergefell in traditional American history, and then post-Obergefell, there's this new source for truth, and thus for the rights that derive from that truth. And what Obergefell says, and what some writings of some of the justices said in the years leading up to Obergefell that finally came to full fruition in Obergefell, is that the source of our truth is ourselves. Each and every person can now define for themselves, the court uses the word define, not discover, as you would discover a truth from nature or nature's law. But you can define for yourself the universe and the mystery of human life and even your own nature. And that it is up to each of us now, according to Obergefell, to learn and teach each other new rights and new concepts of liberty as the years now unfold. Well, at first glance, that may sound pretty egalitarian and democratic, and everybody gets to decide for themselves what is their own right and wrong. But the problem is there's 360 million of us.
It's kind of a recipe for chaos.
Exactly. How long before there's a conflict between your truth and my truth, and your liberties coming from your truth? You know, liberties derive from truth. That's the foundation for liberties and rights. Is you first have to decide what the truth is about the human condition. And then when those conflicts arise, which they do, as you point out, in the first quarter of a millisecond after you make that decision that everybody gets to decide, who now will decide which truth is true, which liberty prevails, which of the old traditional rights will survive, and which must yield to these newly discovered rights that we're supposed to be learning and teaching each other. And one step further, because of Obergefell, on what basis is somebody going to decide that? You and I and the other 360 million people are the source of the conflict, so we can't help the court decide. And we're no longer tethered to the understanding of what the founders understood liberty to mean. I mean, the founders, think about it, they had this concept of this universal truth, and it's sort of an integrated fabric. And so their ideas and what would come out of that as a religious exercise and a religious freedom would be consistent and compatible in that old paradigm with that universal external truth. You're not going to have some right that is recognized as part of that cosmology that's inconsistent with the right of exercise of religion, which the founders believed in to begin with. So my point is, you can't go back to the founders anymore, according to the court. So now decisions have to be made between the right to life and the right to privacy, between the right of free speech and the right of a classmate not to be offended by your cross necklace. the right to hire vendors for a wedding, and the right of vendors to adhere to their traditional religious beliefs. If we're cut off from the meaning of the words that the founders had, they're the ones who chose those words. They're the ones who wrote those words down, the word liberty in the 14th Amendment. They had a concept, a cosmology for what that meant. But if we're cut off from what the people who actually wrote the words in the Constitution meant by those words, where are we? On what basis are we going to make these value judgments between Jack Phillips' right to bake a cake and design it only for weddings that are consistent with his religious beliefs? There was a Supreme Court justice back in 1953 named Jackson who warned about the ambiguity of the word liberty in the 14th Amendment, and he was concerned that exactly what that word meant would be unknowable in the future, and that what would seem established in one generation would be unsettled in the next, and that the interpretation of the word liberty would be more or less swayed by contemporary intellectual fashions and political currents. That's not my words; those are his. And
we really see it now. We see that.
Yeah, exactly, and so that's as long as we are in this new cosmology of Obergefell, as long as we have now expressly cut the ties to what the founders meant in their world by the word liberty, the word exercise of religion. Again, they had a consistent cosmology going. And now we have opened it up to 360 million different interpretations of truth and therefore of liberty. And who is left to decide but five out of 9 on a bench in Washington, the same 5 who have put us in this new cosmology to begin with. So as long as Obergefell is the law of the land, we have real challenges ahead of us. The next Jack Phillips case is going to be a real challenge. And just think of all the religious liberty cases that, we are hearing about that are being pursued in the courts. It's like in the wake of Obergefell, there was this rush of challenges.
There was
to religious liberty.
Listen, you're leaving us in a dark moment, and we're in one. I hate to say it. Thank you for.
I don't mean to leave you there.
Thank you for our faith and those of us who know the Lord Jesus Christ, because we are in a dark moment in this country. We're going to have to say goodbye now because we're at the end of the program. But Justice Glenn Murdock, I want to thank you so much for just patiently taking us through this progression today, helping our understanding. I hope that you will join us again because I know there's going to be a lot more to talk about in this regard. So we really appreciate having you today.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.